You go. That's a story that was just covered yesterday, but we are not short of stories. There's so many stories like that. Many of us will remember Corey and Wamboi, which is a case that is ongoing. We have Beryl and Mr. Osuri not too long ago, just here in Nairobi. So let me start, first of all, by asking you the same question. I'll start with you, Evans, on whether you feel the media has adequately and objectively highlighted the problem that we have as a society when it comes to domestic violence.
Actually, there's been a lot of conspiracy of silence and poor media reporting, especially when it comes to domestic violence, especially mostly because of the phrases that are being used. I think the media need to live up to its task and be able to actually enhance public participation in discussing in this issue of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. So basically, I think we've not done so much.
We've not done as much as we should. We'll come to the details of why you feel we've not done as we should. But Koki, your thoughts, do you think we have done as much as we could?
Yeah, media has highlighted stories, of course, that have attracted attention based on probably, I saw somebody say maybe urban areas, but as we go along, the key issue that media has taken is to give a victim perspective of the person who is deceased and a criminal perspective of what happens thereafter. And most of the time, the follow-up of the stories have been, just to go back to maybe Sharon and Maureen, you know, it has an element of what you call public shaming. Digging into the past of the lady, if I may say, and trying to give a context as to why it is justified for her to have been killed or murdered or whatever it is. So for me, I feel, okay, in so much as the stories have been highlighted, there's limitation in terms of the area of coverage, but then again, the angle the stories normally tend to take away from the crime, which is, you know, denying people the right to life. Yeah.
All right, Evans, you said that you feel we've not done as much as we should. What more could the media have done or should we have done? Looking that we've highlighted, especially those that have ended up in murder. There are others that maybe people didn't die, but if you remember, there was a lady, I forget her name, but she had her hands chopped off. She didn't die, but it was highlighted.
Mike, matters of intimate partner violence, what you could call as IPV, sometimes it's actually been perceived or reported as yes, it's a crime, but we report without actually being able to say what is the cause and be able to give solutions. Because most of the times when you see the media reporting these cases, even the language that is used is very sensational. Like you can hear a victim being described as a butcher or maybe a jilted lover. These kind of words sometimes do not actually address the problem that is actually... These are societal problems. It's very critical that when incidents of domestic violence occur, we are able actually even to be able to investigate further why they occurred. Because we are just taking them as just mere criminal activities that continue and actually perpetuates. Because if we do not break that conspiracy of silence in being able to follow the stories up to what happened, like the case of Eldoret, many people are saying maybe they had sometimes it's only relationship for a week or 2 days or one day. Then you find someone has murdered the other. I think it's important to be able to see that probably people suffer from mental illness. And these are some of the things we are not actually reporting and actually stating that maybe these cases are due to some factors.
Okay, and Koki, maybe let's look at some of the challenges, and one of them being maybe a cultural background. These are things that we don't ideally talk about in our society. And I want to read a tweet here that came through of somebody who was saying that, let me see if I can fish it out, but culture could be one of those things that maybe affect us. And this person says that, if I can find it, just a second, here we go. Mike, I have witnessed a family that has been in constant fights since I was a child up to now, but they have not stopped. Many of my neighbors confess that during their early days of marriage, they suffered violence until children grew up. I'm glad that you're addressing it. Now, the thing is, here's somebody who admits that they have seen a family that has been suffering and going through this all this time. But the question is, why isn't this reported? If there were thieves, for example, that were breaking into a house and they're known these are thieves, chances are, if it had continued for that long, people would report. But when it comes to domestic violence, we shy away from it.
Okay. First and foremost, what he has mentioned, intimate partner violence, is a worldwide phenomenon. Research indicates that every 1 woman out of 5 faces that, and that every 2 women and 1 man is likely to face intimate partner violence. So it's not unique to our context. That's just a beginning, and not to justify it, but it's just a worldwide problem that needs to be addressed. Why is domestic violence not treated as something that should, the society looks at as a crime or as a violation of rights? Is because traditionally, if you go back to the perspectives that drive stability in society, we have the arguments, and I don't want to be told that I'm a feminist, but there are arguments for patriarchy, the ability to have one sex dominate over the other, and one of the tools of those would be violence. You can even see the pattern over war times, or when there is chaos, there will always be domination over one sex over the other. That is not to say that in modern times it's just men who are powerful over women. It is also women who are powerful over men. How many times have we gone into the internet and just seen women, beating up men and, getting away with it?
And some even killing.
Exactly. And planning to kill, with the motive to do so. So I think the issue, like he says, there are other issues that need to be reported. And the media is found of, I don't think it's found, I don't want to say it's found, but finds it easier to give episodic account frames and about an incident, and then doesn't connect these incidences to what is happening around these people. Maybe the media needs to take more time to focus on media advocacy for this particular issue. Because one of the things, the fundamental things that we are seeing is that the right to life is violated. And we know that everybody is entitled to security. So I think that the media needs to maybe make gender violence its national disaster and focus on what the reasons are. Like he says, mental health. That's the story you've given us from Eldoret. Sorry. This gentleman is somebody who's come from the US. You don't know what he's been through or where he has been. We don't have his criminal records. We don't know who he is. And then, of course, this is what results.
All right. And allow me now to introduce Victor Bwire. He's a programs manager at Media Council of Kenya. Thank you for joining us, Victor. Matters domestic violence. We started off by looking at whether media has actually adequately and objectively covered those issues, but we are now on challenges. What are some of the challenges you feel that maybe media goes through? Because again, I was highlighting the question of culture and the fact that these are things that are happening in people's private homes. So the only time we get to know about them is when they flare up. And unfortunately, even those who are close to people maybe who are going through domestic violence are silent about it. They never come up and give out the information. And again, there's a backlash that comes. If, for instance, somebody came and said that they're having issues with their wives and there was violence yesterday, even relatives will come out and say, is airing dirty linen the best way to go?
Thank you, Mike. One, I wouldn't hold the media accountable for domestic violence in the sense that media reports. Media is not a researcher in domestic violence. And people who do specialties in those areas, either at academy level, NGO level, or whatever government level, need to come out about this. Media will provide a platform for discussion. Because how many journalists are gender violence experts? So those are some of the challenges, and it beholds those who are involved and have expertise in those areas to speak about it. It behoves on we Kenyans, neighbors, and people in the families to come out with those stories. And media will give. And you have seen in most of our newspapers, largely, Nation is called a family newspaper. And anytime there's a story that involves a family, a death, it's always given, and you can check in the editorial policy. Even Standard, we have seen stories that touch human interests. Obviously death and what are given prominence, but they are given prominence as far as people can provide this information. Because remember what we are raising, some of these things happen in our homes where media does not stay. There's that stigma that will you report something that has happened again? But you have seen, for the last 2-3 weeks, you have seen quite a number of unfortunate stories of deaths that are happening around the country. There have been page one stories, and the best media can do is to give a page one story. But remember, like you are saying, also, the challenges. You get this story today, somebody reported today, you don't know that family. By the time you go to dig to even know in America this guy was doing this and this and this at the media level, it's not easy as that.
And unfortunately, it's also coming too little too late, because we're only getting to find out that there was issues when the person is dead.
At the last minute.
At the last minute,
At
yes.
the unfortunate end. When these things start happening, people are in abusive relationship, unrelated, rarely do people come out. They always come out at the last minute. But they also, generally in Kenya, especially in Nairobi, people are so individualistic, where you stay with a neighbor for 5 years and you don't know them, where some of these things happen even to a neighbor, like the latest case, the burial case, where even neighbors, and they are not saying, you know, yet at one time we are saying media did not report. How did it get to report it? But where these cases have happened, I can remember journalists are also human beings. Some of them come from these families also. And sometimes it's reported and you ask yourself, this is my aunt and I'm a journalist, how do I remember most of those stories are also traumatical and mentally traumatizing even to the journalist. Look at the journalists who went to Eldoret to cover that story of death. What goes to that?
How does it leave you when you find a body in a bin?
I mean, so journalists are also traumatized in the same sense. They're mentally disturbed by those. I have colleagues who report crime, I can tell you for Frank, and the images they're giving you outside, they're also traumatized from some of these events. So as we talk about all this, because remember, in most of our desks, other than, for example, KTN that has Dr. Masiko Reed, many of the journalists are not, for example, mental experts and the same. So we will request those who have the expertise to come. And if media denies them opportunities to appear or do those columns, then we will
That
hold
would be
the
another
media.
case. But Koki, go on.
Yeah, okay, Victor, I appreciate the fact that there's trauma in reporting things as such. There is the idea that stories basically come at the end of at the tail of the whole issue. But to be in all honesty, curriculums have to accommodate specialized reporting. If you are supporting business reporters and you say that there is some syllabus for that, I can say for a fact in USIU we have gender reporting, we have human rights reporting, we have people who understand these issues first and are learning how to report these things. So we cannot just say, okay, no, we will be traumatized, oh no, this is what's going to happen. No, we are
But
going
how many universities have? USIU have?
I mean,
out
I
of
think
12, 112
I don't know,
colleges.
but
They're not there. And they're an academy.
Can I finish? Yeah. It doesn't justify not reporting. This thing about media saying, oh, no, we don't, we report what happens.
Which is this study that has shown media has not covered?
And the thing is,
that media does not cover
Victor,
gender.
Not effectively. Yes.
And the thing is, do we sit back and say, okay, we're going to wait for the stories to unfold? Can't we be creative enough as the media fraternity and say there is a problem that we have as a nation, as a country, as a society, and it's to do with gender-based violence? How can we get this information out?
One thing is that advocacy journalism lacks. Yeah. And the reason is because probably journalists want to just like deal with what they have. But you can go beyond what you have. For example, if you go to police stations, for example, I think there was domestic violence desks. Some of these desks are empty. Gender desks. They're not there. And many women who even go to report on domestic violence in police stations are turned back. And probably she has been reporting that she's being abused by the husband. When you go there, the police even treat it like it's a personal issue. Until when something happens is when they say, this thing was serious. So I think the media also need to go beyond and do investigative reporting on matters domestic violence. Because when you report when it has occurred,
It's a bit late.
It's a bit late.
And just to add on to that, please, let's not say gender is women violence. Gender is not women violence. There are men who are tortured. I was watching a show the other day on NTV. I think it's called Unscripted. These men were talking about their divorces and what they have gone through. So I don't think it's unique to women. I think it is something that is happening in the home front that needs to be addressed for both men and women.
But Mike, look at the Kenya media scene. We principally depend on a private media. Now, if you start talking about advocacy journalism, who spends their resources on that advocacy journalism? Because let's be frank, we will want journalists to specialize in everything. How many journalists are in this KTN, for example, on the news desk, so that in the very many bits, people specialize in each of them? You know, let's be frank, because for example, in Nation, they wanted some stories on health and what. They have reached out to Bill Gates and they have a page on that. And they're supporting that and other areas because there's something. But just to say KTN will start an advocacy journalism without that sort of, because this is a private business. At the end of the day, the owners want profit and what. Now, public interest journalism has been sacrificed generally because of our funding models.
Yes, that's true, Victor. But at the end of the day, we're storytellers.
Yeah.
And we lack content, or we complain sometimes that we don't have content. Isn't that just magnifying the fact that sometimes we're not creative enough? Because content is there.
Mike, look here, what I'm looking at, because I've worked both in the private sector, I've worked in NGO, I've worked in all these things. And instead of people who work in those areas complaining about why media is not covering them, what are these proactive strategies they are using to get this content out? So that you are telling us, we got you an expert to talk about gender-based violence, you never gave them room or space. So that is not a blame, because media can only do what's humanly possible. So that, we do media monitoring, for example, and there's no single day that passes without a story on gender-based violence in the media. So how adequate is adequate? When will we say now media has covered something?
But he himself has given a solution where he says that Bill Gates and the Nation have collaborated.
So and
therefore, no, excuse me. And therefore, it is not that there can't be a way
to do it.
But it's not the media to be blamed. That's what I'm saying.
Nobody's blaming. We're just
people
saying.
Should come out. The feeders, the men in what? This other what's called. And the universities we have. Yes, Maendeleo Wanaume, in Institute of Development, and other people who are because we are at once we have 179 radio stations in this country, 62 TV stations. They want content, but people who have content are also not coming out. You know, so we must also help people give this information out. Media, in a day, averagely, if we have, for example, 10 gender-based violent-related articles, media will not cover all of them because there are other things that have happened which equally need attention. So we must also balance this thing. But to me, I believe if people who are working in these areas could creatively also find ways of because programs are there, columns are there that carry some of these things. And people can continuously use the media forums that are there, the media platforms, to talk about this thing.
Michael, I think we should take this reporting to the next level. And one of the things I think that should happen is that instead of reporting when the incidences have occurred, I think the media should actually talk to experts and see and try to connect this violence, this kind of domestic violence, to whatever happens in the society. Because I'm sure most of them is that there's stress, there's depression, there's mental illness, and we are not actually reporting and saying that this could be the attributes to domestic violence to the level of this homicide. So domestic violence, only when you're beaten and chased away from it's still domestic violence. But where murder occurs, I think these are critical issues where we think we need to interrogate further and just not only report stories where people have already been killed.
Although, to be fair to media, those stories have been told. Those interviews have been had. We've had psychologists here come and we've talked about the stress levels that we have as a country, the reason why people are becoming more violent and unfriendly. So we've had those incidences and we've had those conversations. But then the question then remains, how much is enough? How much is enough for us to cause this to become a national subject, for example, so that it's on the decrease, so that people actually come out now, like the tweet I've just read of somebody who knows a family that has been in domestic violence for long. They need to realize that they don't need to come to us and tell us a story after the person has died. It needs to become a conversation to a point where there is a problem here. Can it be investigated or can it be highlighted? How much is enough, Koki?
No, do people talk about domestic violence like in social dialogue? Or is it just, you know, talked about as a tool of discipline, as a tool of, you know, putting people in order, society in order? That is one thing we must interrogate. Are we able to raise a the consciousness of the public that domestic violence is actually a crime? And that you as a wife or a man who faces domestic violence can go for a P1 that can be used at any point in your life to accuse that person if he hits you again? Are we creating awareness of the legal perspective of it, what you can do if you find yourself in that situation? Or are we talking about the helplessness of being, having low self-esteem and not being able to, you know, look at it as an issue you should deal with? Are we also addressing, like, for example, the already existing gender issues that are being addressed generally, not just violence? There are other issues, workplace parity, you know, sexual harassment. Are we looking at all these things and giving them limelight to the extent that people begin to see these are salient issues that need attention to, of the public? All
right. Victor Bwire, what solutions do we give as a media? What more do we need to do? Because we cannot say that we've done enough.
To me, media has done what it can do around those subjects. You
feel we've done enough?
Enough can never be reached, but we are doing what is there. Because at one stage, how does, if the society, like Koki is saying, does not talk, if in churches we are not talking about these things, if in our matatus we are not talking about these things, if in our neighborhood we are not talking about these things, I mean, how then would we say it's media that has not done enough? You know, as a society, are these things we talk about? Are these things we report? Are these things, I mean, you have seen in town here where somebody is robbing from here, nobody cares even. We are so individualistic in our societies. Two, we must also balance the issue of privacy and related. And we have seen most of these stories, media would pick either police have intervened or something, because some of these things also border on privacy. What does the code talk about on privacy? That some matters, and unless there's consent and related, how much do you, investigate a family, that has not come out? So sometimes journalists also wait to get an autograph, an entry point, that the matter has reached a police station.
Topical.
So some of these things are not easy as a textbook answer where you say journalists have not done this, because these things are emerging things. These things are moving targets. Today you get us, but I can know. Can a journalist quote themselves, for example? Sometimes it's also difficult. So some of these cases are there, but sometimes you must look for an entry point. You must look for. Nation has newspeaks. And every often they produce stories. Under Dorothy and Church, they produce stories on various topics, including, and I've seen twice now, on gender-based violence. During the 16 days of activism, media gives a lot of space, for this. I know AWC and Jane Godia, they have a publication called Reject that churns out stories on gender-based violence. So I don't know where we say that media is not doing enough, and which media we talk about.
And I don't know how much culture plays into this, because again, as a media, we are definitely within the culture. If culturally, in my community, for example, we don't talk about domestic violence, even if I'm a journalist, then it becomes very difficult for me to go and fish for a story, because I'll feel it's against my culture. But let me just read some of the tweets that are coming through. And somebody says, it's cultural. We have been conditioned from an early age to keep domestic problems private. So I'd rather suffer in silence than to let the whole world know I can't take care of my own house. Evans, do you think that's one of the challenges that we may have in highlighting some of these stories?
Domestic violence threatens the social fabric, of the society. And that's where the media should look at it. And then the other thing I think is, which is important, is that superficial or irresponsible reporting, where journalists report on these matters without, because I think, as Victor said, organizations that deal with matters domestic violence need also to come in and support journalists to be able, just the way court reporters, sports reporters, environment reporters are able to understand what they're reporting on, as opposed to going to a crime scene and just reporting like you're just like entertaining people. Yet these are matters that you need to deeply be able to understand what you are reporting on. So there's a lot of kind of irresponsible reporting. Because if you look at many cases where murder has occurred, the more you read the stories, sometimes you wonder whether the person writing is actually playing a movie as opposed to actually addressing the real issue that has occurred. And I think there's a lot of lack of information when matters of domestic violence are reported. And I think Victor has been in the human rights, and he knows very well that journalists have not been able to report human rights very well because of lack of also training.
Yeah, and the human rights institution, because incidentally, we worked in the same institution. When he left his position in IMLU, and IMLU was a small institution at that time. It was about 4 or 5 staff doing some work. But because we invested in it, as an institution we knew we need media. We started trainings for journalists on torture reporting, created and we gave it a big, but the institutions that are doing around that work we are talking about, who have no media desk, no communication desk, nothing. They have a data, but they don't churn it out. So to me, while we are holding, because I also talk about, because I've been a newsroom, and I know the challenges that are in newsroom, to lie that media will right now invest in almost all these areas we are saying, practically is almost impossible because of, not because journalists are not interested in those areas, but because, I mean, KTN has one crime reporter, for example. Most of these matters we are raising largely come through crime. Now, there's the 10 billion dam, there's whatever, and there's also domestic violence. Where will KTN want to deploy its staff as a first priority? so some of these realities are there. So it then starts behoving us, either academia, media councils, or other institutions working on some of these areas, to start looking at creatively, how do we play into media so that some of these things get to the media within these challenges.
Okay.
I think if media can make a decision to heighten business news, sports news, you've just said that it's a decision. It's an editorial decision. Now it's health, isn't it? There's a health segment. You can also make a decision for media advocacy for gender issues.
Media cannot do advocacy.
No. Editorial decisions can be made to focus on that particular issue. Even if it is partnering with who, it can be made. It is right that people who are doing research, who know about those things, should come through, but maybe they don't even know how to approach media.
You know what where we are going towards is probably one page in the newspaper will be for domestic violence.
And that's media advocacy.
And I think it's just like page, you can put the center page or whichever page, but there's a page that must report on domestic violence because it occurs every day. It's becoming a problem.
And the other thing is not just to look at it in terms of numbers, in terms of statistics, in terms of this men died, this women died. It's about the story, the cultural perspective, what are the domestic issues that could have arisen, what are the challenges society is facing from a gender point of view. Give it context, and those stories can be told.
They can be told. All right, we'll need to wind up. Victor, your wrapping thoughts on what more we can do, because you've said enough cannot be reached, so there's definitely room for us to do more. That would definitely be a way to go. So what more can we do as media to ensure that we highlight?
I think media will continue highlighting gender-based violence as it does on other matters.
But
because
as a reaction or on the tail end of the incident, isn't there a way that we can highlight this so that it's not just nipping, so that it becomes a national conversation?
You know, practically, we have started pages on some of these things. We even started a page, for example, on media itself. Standard gave 2 pages for media-related issues. And in a year, they had run out of people to contribute content to those pages. So you can start a page today on gender-based violence. Will you sustain it? Because some of these experiments have been done in newsrooms. Will you sustain it? So media editors like you are also making both those decisions, the advocates, but also business decisions. How do we, for example, sustain some of these things? That's why I'm saying partnerships are the way to go. And if you look at now the business models of media houses, even including outside, is partnerships with specialized area people working in those areas. Then you can start thinking of creating a program or a page for that. Otherwise, you'll start a media house, 6 months from today, you have no even content for that, all those things. So partnerships.
All right, Evans?
I think we need now to break the conspiracy of silence, especially in the newsroom. Domestic violence is cutting across the society, the social fabric, the poor, the rich. In fact, a lot of people are suffering domestic violence, but they cannot say. I mean, whether from the toppest to the lowest, even the poorest. So it should not be perceived that domestic violence only happens to the poor communities, but it happens even up there. But people don't talk about it. People drive together in very big cars, but they fought in the night. So these are some of the things we really need to break that conspiracy of silence, because it is actually threatening the social fabric.
All right, Koki, your closing comments.
Violence is a crime, be it in the home, be it outside the home, and it should be treated as such. And trying to give context about why should be one of the things that I propose the media should do. If we are lacking in terms of understanding issues, gender, issues related to anything that would lead to people fighting in their homes, I think that needs to be addressed. I know for a long time, violence is looked at as a way to control, to discipline, to put people in order. But then again, maybe our mechanisms of dealing with conflicts need to be advanced, and we need to educate the public on that.
All right, thank you very much. Koki Ochieng, lecturer, media and communication at USIU, Evans Wafula, communications consultant, and Victor Bwire, programs manager, Media Council of Kenya. Thank you for joining us in the newsroom this morning, and we'll continue that conversation going on online. And remember, it's gender-based violence, not women or men being, it's gender. It is actually about gender and what we need to do to ensure that we have that society